Seems to know where Sir Alan Stanford is, though the American authorities would like to, not to mention the England and Wales Cricket Board, whose benefactor he is, or was thought to be. He's being investigated for what the American Securities and Exchange Commission, the financial regulator there, thinks is a fraud involving about £5.5 billion. But they can't find him to serve him with court orders. In Antigua in the Caribbean, where he's the biggest employer, there's been a run on one of his banks. It's the same story in Venezuela. And the story throws light on the murky world of offshore money, the vast billions that float undetected around the globe. Geoffrey Robinson is a writer who specialises in investigations into that money, and I spoke to him on the line from New York. Looking at the Stanford affair, what lesson should people draw? What had we learned?
Well, it goes back to the if it's too good to be true, it ain't true. He was offering certificates of deposit that were paying interest rates almost twice what everybody else's were. And you have to say to yourself, why? Fraud is a very easy crime to understand. I tell you a lie, you give me money, that's fraud. He was telling these people that these certificates of deposit were backed with really good liquid assets and that they could pay these high rates. Untrue, a lie. But you have to look beyond all of this and understand who Mr. Stanford is to realize why this is going to be as major as the Madoff affair. Perhaps not in the volume of money, but in the noise that it makes. It will have huge ramifications to the offshore world.
Why?
Well, Antigua, where he's based, is perhaps the most suspect of all the jurisdictions. A regime where there was banking secrecy, phony shell companies were available, onshore banks, offshore banks, no regulation. In that atmosphere, Mr. Stanford arrived and created the largest onshore bank and the largest offshore bank. Now, when you get a banking license in the offshore world, one of the rules is don't hurt the locals, don't hurt the natives. His onshore bank has now hurt the Antiguans. There are a lot of people who are losing money. I think what we're going to see is that the government of Antigua will not protect him and that an awful lot of things will now come out.
People have a kind of vague knowledge of offshore assets, offshore banking, places where money can be put. What light is now thrown on that by this affair?
Go back to the beginnings. There were a number of Brits who were looking to evade taxes in Britain. So they opened up places like the Bahamas and the Caymans. And this huge vacuum sucked in money to the point where in the 80s and the 90s, the Colombian drug cartels said this is the ideal place to hide money. Now, it's a great idea if you're the local jurisdiction hiding the money because you're making money off the back of this. It's a really bad idea if you're a bad guy because these days law enforcement knows to look in the offshore world.
How much is there?
Well, I said that there was $600 to $800 billion in drug money circling around the world, most of it going into the offshore world. But that represents a mere 10% of the money hidden offshore. So there's $6 to $8 trillion hidden offshore. Nobody knows who owns it. Nobody knows how it got there, what it's doing there, but it certainly represents a major political force.
Can the financial authorities of this country or any other country, the United States or anywhere else, find out what is going on the islands, the offshore havens where this money is?
No. Basically, you can't unless you go to the islands and say you have to open up the books. There are ways of forcing them to do that. But, you know, I sat on the Today program right after 9/11 with Gordon Brown, and he was saying, we're going to go look for terrorist money. And I was the one who said, you're not going to find it because it's not there. What is there, what is in the offshore world is money that needs to be hidden and laundered. So it's dirty money that somehow has been accumulated, say in drug trafficking, that needs to come out the other end appearing to be clean and hidden from the tax authorities. And these jurisdictions earn a big living doing just that, helping these people launder their money and hide their money. So if Britain or the United States were to say, look, we want to find out what's going on, the jurisdiction would say it's none of your business.
How big a problem is this for the SEC in the States and the FSA in this country?
Well, it's a huge problem. It's an enormous problem because there is so much money that's hidden offshore. Stanford claimed originally that he had no exposure to Madoff. It now turns out that he had a very small exposure, about $400,000 was invested in the Madoff fund. But what happened with Madoff was the tide came out. And when the tide comes out, you suddenly see who's been swimming without a bathing suit. So that the SEC has now gotten religion.
They may have got religion, But what do they do about it?
Well, now what they've done about it is they've sent the marshals into Mr. Stanford's businesses and taken the records. The SEC subpoenaed Mr. Stanford a few days ago. He failed to appear. And that's when they sent the marshals in to get the paperwork.
How many others are there out there?
This is the tip of the iceberg. There will be a number of others. I said when Madoff happened, it's only the beginning. This will now be yet one of several. But there's something else going on here. And I have to be careful how I say this. I know personally, because I've discussed it with them, a number of law enforcement agencies in the United States, plus a number of prosecutors who have been looking at Mr. Stanford for the past 15 years. He's been on everybody's radar for a number of things. Now, innocent until proven guilty, yes. Guilt by association, no, I'm not insinuating that. But Antigua is a very strange place. And during the 80s and the 90s, the only money that was in the Caribbean, was drug money. And fortunes were made off the back of that. Mr. Stanford is being looked at for a number of things. There have been rumors about him for, as I say, the last 15 years. What's going to happen now is they will ask to talk to him. If he doesn't appear, I suspect an arrest warrant will be issued by the FBI on criminal charges. If he does, he's got a real problem because he knows an awful lot. And I would suspect there are a number of people, very heavyweight people throughout the offshore world and in other jurisdictions who really don't want to be associated with Mr. Stanford and are not going to be pleased if he talks. So this man has a very, very serious problem.
In other words, Stanford is the beginning of the story.
Stanford is certainly the beginning of the story of Antigua. He's not the beginning of the story of the offshore world because there have been problems in the offshore world since it was invented by the gangsters and the tax evaders.
Jeffrey Robinson, thanks very much.